Hello and welcome to What It Takes, where each week we talk to leaders and change makers to learn about programs and organizations that have the potential to enrich us all. Southwest Virginia is home to many amazing old movie theaters which are in varying states of repair and financial solvency, given the difficulty of maintaining old buildings built for a specific time and purpose. My guest today has done more than anyone to preserve and promote one of the last remaining first-run classic movie houses, though today it's home to much more than just movies. Ian Fortier is the CEO of the Grandin Theatre Foundation in Roanoke, which has recently completed a massive upgrade while still staying true to its roots. Before we begin, I should say that my wife and I had our first date in the theater in the late 1980s, and I'm a proud board member of the Grandin Theatre Foundation. Ian, welcome to What It Takes.
Thanks, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
You and I go back a ways, but for the benefit of our viewing audience, how does one take the helm of the Grandin Theatre? What's your background, where are you from, and what led you to where you are now?
So I'm originally from northern New England. I grew up in and around Burlington, Vermont. And when you graduate from the University of Vermont in the mid-90s and you want to start a career, you kind of have to leave. Because unlike the diverse economy that Vermont is now, back then it was still very much cottage industry. So most people go to Boston or New York, and at the time my girlfriend and I decided to go to Washington, D.C. So I moved to Northern Virginia in 1996, and I've been a Virginia driver's license holder since that time. So I think I'm in my 26 years in the Commonwealth. When I got my career started in Washington, D.C., there was one driving factor that I knew as a 24-year-old, and that's I did not want to work in an environment where I was in competition with people that I worked with. So that essentially drove me towards the nonprofit realm, and I've been a nonprofit professional now for roughly 26 years. And when I worked in DC, which is, of course, America's capital for nonprofits, because you have so many national nonprofits that are based there for policy and advocacy purposes, but you also have these massive international ones too. So I worked in health and human services, I worked in environmental fundraising, I worked in environmental conservation, and then when I came to Southwest Virginia in 2006, I started in the New River Valley for a couple of years, and I was working in historic preservation. So I think it's more important when you think about me, to think about me as less as the executive director of a movie theater that's a nonprofit, and more of somebody who's worked in various aspects of nonprofit fields.
Yeah, and I think those of us I've been in and out of nonprofits my whole career, it takes the ability to balance that sort of never-ending need for resources.
Yeah.
And also fulfilling whatever mission your nonprofit sets for itself. That's a tough balance. How do you manage that?
Well, I think there's a lot of nonprofits out there that come from fear-based positioning or worry-based positioning. If you don't give us money, our doors will close. I mean, we've all seen the Sarah McLachlan commercials on TV late at night when we're supposed to be in bed. But what you're essentially saying is that how do you express need but also stability at the same time? And I've always kind of used the metaphor of an A-frame roof, where you've really got this 6-inch strip that you can stand on, or you roll too fast and furious one way into instability or the perception of instability, or you can roll in the other direction into believing, having people believe that you don't have the need that you have. So I think the most important thing is to give people a dozen different ways to touch your organization, and always give an abundance model, always give people an opportunity to participate, whether it's a ticket for $775 or a $100,000 donation and everything in between. Give people an opportunity to participate and touch your organization in multiple ways, instead of just driving them to one or two or three ways that might not feel comfortable for them. But the other aspect of that is be dynamic. Always be working towards something. Because even though the Grandin Theatre Foundation is financially stable and has been for nearly a decade, we still have aspirations, and we still have growth model, and we still have things that we need to accomplish in order to better serve our community. So the way to do that is to continue to express your growth and your need, while at the same time letting people know that what you've accomplished is building a stronger and stronger foundation to move towards that.
The theater is interesting in the nonprofit space because, until recently, until the pandemic, essentially, it was mostly strictly a first-run movie house, and that has competition from for-profits.
Correct.
During that phase of the Grandin, and we're going to talk about how that's changed a little bit now, what were the ways that you could communicate that the Grandin was doing more than the for-profit large corporate theaters?
Well, and I think it goes back to before the pandemic. It really kind of starts with my tenure. So I'm in my 9th year now, and I got there in 2014 after spending almost 5 years at the Jefferson Center. And those two are very similar arts models. They're both front of house ticket based. They're both nonprofits that have the ability to write grants, get corporate partners, solicit donorship money, and then these large venues that are, sort of big historic buildings that need to be taken care of. But what we did very early on in my tenure is we had some frank conversations with the board about what made us different as an organization than other arts organizations in our community, as well as corporate theaters. And I don't think that question had really been asked kind of at the level that we kind of dove into, because it's very easy to compare the Grandin with Regal or AMC because they're all movie theaters. But in reality, that is the only commonality that they have. Whereas these are corporate multiplexes with big national or international companies, multiple venues, nationwide, worldwide, so on and so forth. There's only one Grandin Theater. And realizing that this is the oldest arts and cultural venue in our region, now in our 90th year, we started to identify aspects about us that made us unique. 1, we're the oldest. 2, we're essentially a historic landmark. 3, we're the last remaining golden age cinema in the Roanoke area, when at one point there were 7 or 8 theaters similar to the Grandin. And then 4, we're a cultural icon in our community. It's one of those things that people think of when they think of those 5 marquee, no pun intended, those 5 marquee things that really make a community as unique and brand it and identify it for its own character. So we started to realize those things, and then we started to embrace them and proceed in a way that could give the community a greater opportunity to interact with us.
I think one of the things that makes the Grandin special is that, through the work of previous owners before it was a nonprofit, the Lindsay family, the Hunsakers, keeping it alive so that it remained a theater. It never became an antique mall. It never was never carved up into anything else.
That's right.
For people who, this goes out well beyond the Roanoke Valley. So for people who don't know about the Grandin, what is its place of importance especially in the village, the Grandin Village area, which is part of the greater Roanoke City?
Yeah, so for those people who aren't aware of Grandin Village, it's widely regarded as the best mixed-use, retail, boutique, pedestrian-friendly commercial district that we have probably in Southwest Virginia. It's 5 or 6 blocks of retail. There's 10 plus restaurants. There's the oldest natural foods co-op in the Commonwealth. There's a theater, ballet, several retail outlets, several ABC licenses, which makes it a vibrant sort of community for dining and movies and shopping and so on and so forth. And the Grandin is unique in the fact that out of those 7 or 8 other theaters that no longer exist, they were all downtown or in the downtown area, which is why they were essentially raised, because at some point their capital depreciation and the cost to keep them open, and their return on investment, it became evident that it was going to be more profitable for somebody to raise that building and build a parking garage or build a business building and really, turn it into something else. But in Grandin, that theater is an anchor to that community, a cultural anchor, a geographic anchor, a historic anchor. I mean, as soon as you bang that left from Memorial onto Grandin Road and that marquee's ablaze, you get an idea that that community is something special. I mean, you live in that neighborhood, your wife lives in that neighborhood, and there's lots of people that are in that neighborhood or came to that neighborhood because that art house community, that theater holds that anchor and creates that unique nature.
Yeah, and I will say, again, a big supporter, and the, I will go see a movie. I will wait to see it at the Grandin if I know it's
Right.
going to be at the Grandin, because it just is a better experience. I want to talk about some ways that experience has been improved, but before we leave sort of the history of the theater, it was built in 1932, opened in 1932. That was, segregation existed in the Roanoke Valley and Roanoke City for sure. Black people, if able to go, weren't necessarily thinking they felt welcome. Knowing that history, what do you try to do? What does the theater try to do to be as inclusive as possible while recognizing that was kind of a dark time?
So back to that previous sort of conversation I had about identifying what our identity was, when we first arrived and we started asking those deep, serious questions, we realized that if we were just a movie theater, that the ceiling on who would come into the building was really low. You're essentially just bringing people in who want to watch what movies you have. But the Grandin being sort of a cultural icon and a 90-year-old facility that isn't a corporate theater has also the ability to be a rich cultural community center. And which is to say that we aspire to, and have previously and now are doing much more of, diversified programming, whether it's community conversations or educational matinees or spoken word or storytelling like Hoot and Holler with Lee, who was here recently, or whether it's debate series and story book tellers or children's authors or live music or theatrical or on and on and on. And sort of the answer is to what you're talking about is, if we're a cultural community center instead of just a movie theater, and not just in labeling and marketing and branding, but also in true authenticity, the ceiling for people who can come into the building not only rises substantially, but almost pops off entirely. Because you can do any kind of programming that would be welcome for anybody, whether it's, ethnic diversity or age diversity or end-of-life conversations or health and medical and wellness or kids coming in or Black history or Hispanic heritage or Pride Month. I mean, on and on and on. You can do any sorts of programs, and the building essentially just becomes a very welcoming and capable professional vessel for the community to utilize for relevant conversations that are not only education-based or entertainment-based, but create social discourse, which I think is what your community theater should do.
We, I say we because, again, as a board member,
Yeah.
The pandemic hit, movie theaters closed, everything closed. But it was a chance for the theater to reimagine itself a little bit. How do you describe what happened as a result of this horrible, horrible thing, the pandemic, that is propelling the theater forward now?
Well, it's funny. Before the pandemic, I thought my job was the executive director of a first-run movie theater and cultural community center. And the pandemic changed that. Now I realize that my job is to be the executive director of a cultural community center that needs to serve its community in whatever way is possible at that time. As a first-run movie theater, when we were open 365 days a year, we didn't have, this is prior to COVID, we didn't have a lot of opportunity to do diversified programming. It usually had to be in the mornings or late at night or during the week, where you could, pull a film and
the theater itself wasn't very conducive to a
That's
lot
right.
of things you wanted to do.
Yeah, we didn't have, professional lighting in the main theater. We didn't have sound baffling. We didn't have all the things that we have now that we've been working on, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. And then first-run programming disappeared. I mean, all the things, we're the only arts and cultural organization in the Valley who is completely and utterly dependent on someone else's art form to do our work. We have no control over our content. except to select what it is that we want to show and screen and hope that they'll give it to us. Whereas Mill Mountain Theater, Jefferson Center, they're picking their artists, they're picking their show, they're actually creating that. So projected art, film art is a little bit different than that. So what we realized is when the pandemic came, first run programming sort of disappeared entirely. It was either, cut off or shelved, and there was no movies to show. So even when we got through that first 3-month period and then we were allowed to, emerge with small groups and social distancing and the proper safety requirements, we didn't have any content. So we went from showing 120 to 160 movies a week to 1 movie a week. And instead of being a first-run movie theater, we became a second-run movie theater. So we said, all right, it's July 2020. We've ducked our heads for 3 months. Let's put on 1 movie every Friday night. Indiana Jones, Dirty Dancing, E.T. We'll put on some big screen classics. We'll only sell 90 seats for the entire theater, and we'll see if people buy. And they did. We sold all 4 of them out. And then we did the same thing in August. We sold all 4 of them out. And we started doing second-run films 2 times a week, 5 to 8 times a month. And we did that for an entire year. And the irony was, when it's a finite resource. This time and building space is a finite resource. So instead of showing 120 and 160 movies a week and you only showed 2, you had 6.5 days a week where that building was empty. And so we pivoted towards a rental model. We said to people who are in their bubble or with their families, you can come into this building, 10 or 15 people at a time. We'll shut the door behind you. You'll be the only people here. We'll pop the popcorn. We'll sell you concessions. You can put whatever you want on screen. You turn the lights on, run around, talk, do whatever you want to do. And we'll see how that goes. And in a 1-year period, from July 1st, 2020, in the thick of the pandemic, to the end of June in 2021, the Grandin Theatre did over 300 private rentals. That's almost 1 a day. 300 in 365 days.
Right. And you also took advantage of this somewhat downtime, reduced time, and switching to a weekend movie model.
Yeah.
Tell me about the heart of the main campaign and what its result has been in terms of transforming the experience.
So before the pandemic hit, even before we were aware of what COVID was, in the fall of 2019, myself and some board members started to have an open discussion about the main theater of the Grandin, which is our 320-seat venue. And one of only 3 300-ish seat venues in the entire region. And what we realized is that this hallmark venue, this room that we have that really is the Grandin Theatre, when you think of the Grandin Theatre, you think of that room, was kind of underperforming for the community and underperforming to its potential. It was really one-dimensional. You could kind of only just hit play and watch a movie. You might have a panel, you might have somebody sing every once in a while, but there was no infrastructure that supported diversified programming. And then also, one of the reasons for this conversation was we realized that Hollywood's kind of getting a little bit more unstable in the last several years. There are massive buyouts. Disney bought Lucas, they bought Marvel, then they bought 20th Century Fox. And they take those inventories, they bury them in the ground. And then you've got Hulu, plus Live TV, plus, Apple Plus, Paramount Plus, Disney, Netflix, Vudu. So there's all sorts of this pressure regarding great content that's going directly to people's televisions as well. So we don't control our product. Our product's becoming more unstable. Our product's being diverted into people's living rooms. So we started to realize that a sustainability for us going down the road needed to mean that we had more diversified programming. Because as just a movie theater, again, that ceiling's really low, and it's getting lower and lower. And if we're not able to utilize the facility as a cultural community center as much as a movie theater, we might have some issues down the line. And we believe that the best way to serve the most people in our community was to be a cultural community center and a movie theater, which helps split that schedule up. So coming out of COVID, we really liked this rental model. It really worked for us. You saw it firsthand. And this community proved over and over again that it was willing to rent the Grandin Theatre during the week, during a pandemic, willing to have business seminars or live events or private parties or birthday parties or anniversaries over and over again. So when we came out of COVID and went back to first run, we decided that a hybrid model was the best thing for us to do. So now we show movies Friday, Saturday, and Sundays, and we don't ever want to stop being a movie theater because that's the identity of the Grandin Theatre. That's when 80, I would say 88 to 90% of our revenue was generated before the pandemic. Because
Right, people were mostly coming on the weekends.
You lose money.
I gotta say, personally, and I've communicated this to you.
I know.
I was a Tuesday night movie guy.
I know.
I get it. Like, you know,
I know.
We've now transitioned to a Sunday movie.
Well, and it's, you know, the reality is you lose money as a movie theater Monday through Thursdays. You just do, no matter who you are, where you are. Because people go to movies usually Friday, Saturday, and Sundays.
Right.
So, you know, the pre-COVID first run model was essentially based on faith.
How does the, you know, before the pandemic, so a couple of years before the pandemic, you became able to sell adult beverages, to sell beer and wine out of the concession stand, had to redesign the concession area to make that happen. How does that, you know, seems like you're really thinking ahead. How does that help you now that you're doing parties and events at the theater?
It's very helpful. I mean, we added $60,000 in gross revenue to our balance sheet after the first year of being able to sell beer and wine and Prosecco and cider. There's no hard alcohol, but it's pretty much everything else that you would want. And it's a really qualitative experience. I mean, we don't have roving gangs of 20-year-olds who come in to overdrink or anything. I mean, Grandin's a pretty sophisticated area regarding who drinks and what they drink. So, but it was a qualitative experience. It was, you know, it was an opportunity to have a nice glass of red wine or a local draft beer while you watched your movie. And most of the people who come in, you have one drink or maybe two.
Right.
And they're coming from dinner or they're off to dinner, you know, so we don't really want to compete with our neighbors. We just want to give our patrons an opportunity to do that. But as we've transitioned towards more live programming, I mean, we saw Hoot and Holler last week or 2 weeks ago with a sold-out crowd. We had the Roanoke Comedy Fest on October 7th. You know, just had the gala. You know, these are big opportunities for people to participate in the theater for live, diversified programming and have that glass of beer, have that glass of wine. So it's been a lot, and it's meant a lot. And the piece of legislation is actually called the Grandin Law. I don't know if you remember this, but we worked with a Virginia representative from Montgomery County and wrote this piece of legislation to serve historic and nonprofit cinemas in the Commonwealth. There's only 6 buildings in the entire Commonwealth that
benefited from that
legislation. Benefited from the license, yeah.
I want to give you a chance to talk about the staff and how fantastic it's been. You know, they've really soldiered through this mess. We got about a little less than 3 minutes left. And also, the makeup of your staff has changed a little bit from like almost all teenagers and a few others to a little bit more professional staff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we will always be, and I think this goes back to the Hunsaker years. You know, Julie was really sort of 86 through 99, 2000. Julie created a teen culture, and we've kind of kept that because we really think it's a great place for people to have their first job. And it's getting harder and harder with difficult economies to see teenagers have opportunities to be employed because so many 20-year-olds are picking up second and third jobs, which is just a harsh reality of our society now. So we've seen a little bit of that as well. We've seen those 20 and 30-year-olds come to the Grandin for a second job or a third job where they work 1 or 2 shifts a week, which is kind of helpful to have somebody who's a little bit older, especially when you do have an ABC license and you want to make sure that there's people who are older and mature and have understanding and experience, and especially for live events that are complex and have 300 people and many moving parts. To throw a 15 or 16-year-old in the mix is sometimes something that we try to avoid. So we ride the balance of having young adults who are working their second or third job with us, as well as starting people off. I mean, we have two 15-year-olds now. I have a straight A student who's 15 out of Patrick Henry who gives me 15 hours a week, and we like to matriculate them and keep them their whole time in high school and then send them off to college. So
there's such a collection of former
alumni
employees and alumni, and believe it or not,
yeah.
There goes our time.
Yeah.
We could talk for a lot longer, as usual is the case. But again, if you want to keep up with both the movie schedule and the special events hosted by the Grandin, I hope you'll visit their website at www.grandintheatre, that's re.com. And thanks for watching What It Takes.